I'm from Somalia, so when I was 7 years old, I was cut. I had FGM with my little sister, because what happened in Somalia is 98% of the Somali women has been cut. We know the number is going down, but originally it was 98% of all Somali women are cut. For us, it is something that we don't hide about. It's something we celebrate. I remember for the first time having gifts, having like watch, and I had my hair done, we had my henna done, and me and my little sister. But traditional, the younger one goes through first. So I remember the next morning, the cutter came and she just looked at me right through my eyes and said, right, be strong for your little sister. Means that don't cry, don't scream, don't make her scared. And I did. Because again, it's that you are waiting for FGM. It's part of life. It's like by the time you are 7 years old, you have to be cut. Otherwise, you go to school and your friends are asking, when are you gonna have your turn? And of course, as a child, you go home and you ask your mom, when is my turn? So traditionally, by the time the girl is 8, it's already done. So she came and she did that. Again, in the cutter, she's not a doctor, she's not a midwife, she's not a nurse, she knows nothing about the human being. But this is what we need to remember as well, that all these women cutters are something they inherited from their mom or great-grandmother. And again, that's how they pay the bills. So of course, that when she comes to cut girls, this is just something she does 10, 20 times a day. So she came and she did that, and to me, I remember that she was just wearing these black clothes. And again, in Somalia, we wear really vibrant, colorful clothes and everything. So when she came in, I was just so scared of her. So I make sure that I don't scream, I don't cry. Then it was my turn, and I remember her putting a needle, because again, that thousands and thousands and thousands of girls do not get any local anesthetic. They don't get no medical help. They get cut for wherever they are or wherever that's been set up for them to be cut. So for me, it's one of the reasons I always say I'm one of the luckiest girl alive, is that my mom and dad can afford local anesthetic. They had that money where they can buy that. So of course what they do is that they buy the medication separately, then they give it to the cutter, and the cutter administers that. Now in the UK, there is no nurse or a midwife can give a medication unless you be signed up, unless you are qualified medical profession. You can't give that. So this is why I want people to know as well that these women play big role in community. Imagine that woman who cut me 20 years down the line, if I get pregnant, she'll be the one that is helping me to give birth to my child. So it moved from there. Once I was cut, it was like everything's fine, get on with your life. But what happened is that our legs are tied together for 2 weeks. So your legs, they have this long string and they tie it all the way from your waist to the feet. And that's because when you walk in, you're supposed to walk slowly. And you walk slowly because again, if you're a child, you're gonna run around. You're not gonna think, oh, I got stitches and stuff. So what they do is to save us actually going back again. Because if a stitch comes out of place, the cutter will come back and she'll do it again. And for 2 weeks, that's how we've been. So you walk to the toilet really slow like this, and then when you get to the toilet, we have to lay down. And when you lay down, that's how you pass urine. Because you can't just sit down like a normal person. You have to lay on the floor. You have to pass urine. You have to scream for your auntie. They pick you up. They take you to the room. They dry you up. And it's a 2 weeks of just the role of like that. After the 2 weeks, she came and she said, everything is fine. The world's your oyster. Go now. You are a woman. And to me, I was very happy. I was really excited. I was like, I couldn't wait the school day to come. I'm like, yes, I had FGM now. And in Somali it's called gudnin, which is gudnin when you translate it is circumcision, which is kind of makes it normal as well. Yeah, so we were just running around and I felt like I was a woman. And again, what do you know being a woman at the age of 7? How do you know to be strong for your sister? So for me, that moment, the moment I was cut as a child, that I have to be strong for my sister, so I become a woman for my younger sister at the age of 7. And then when I healed and I got better, it's like, now you're a woman, get on with the life. But you are still a child. We talk about the problems with FGM. For me, my problem didn't start until I turned 11. I remember I turned 11 years old, and this time we were in Mogadishu, which is the capital of Somalia, and the war just started, and I was getting abdominal pain every single night. So I just ran to my parents' room, and they just put me between the bed and just said, you know, let's go to sleep. So first couple of nights I did, but then like the third night I couldn't sleep at all. And my mom and dad, of course, know there was something wrong, and dad went out to look for a hospital. And my dad now was head of the army, so he was actually at risk of being attacked or being killed. So he found this little hospital called the SOS Hospital. It was in Mogadishu, and it was run by Italian doctors with Somali doctors and nurses, and it was a maternity, and then they had children on the other side. I was the first FGM case that they ever took on. But then again, because the hospital was the only hospital that was open, my dad just took me there, and they were like, okay, we don't know what's wrong with this child. I'm 11 years old. So they're like, let's just do ultrasound. And I remember them doing the ultrasound and saying, there's a shadow there. We think she's got a cyst. I think this is why she's got a pain. But we will keep her in the hospital. So they kept me for 48 hours just to see if I had a cyst, if the cyst was growing, and do I need an emergency operation. After that, I had the ultrasound, and of course the shadow that they could see was getting bigger, and that's when they said to my parents, right, she's got a cyst, it's getting bigger, and we've got to operate her right now. And of course mom and dad said yes, operate her. It's only when they opened me up, they operated me and they opened up my abdominal, that they realized that I did not have a cyst. It was actually my period that was accumulating inside. So I don't know, those of you, and hopefully that whoever is watching here might not know the types of FGM. There's 4 types of FGM. There is type 1, which is a slit or a cut of the clitoris. Normally there's no stitches involved, but now we know, as we see patients more and more and more, we see sometimes there is 2 or 3 stitches that actually is involved, but it's always on the clitoris. So that is type 1. Type 2 is sometimes total removal of the clitoris, the labia minora, the labia majora. They pull the skin together and then they stitch it halfway. So as a medical professional as well, at the background, we used to see patients like that. So if a patient has got type 3 FGM, the way we knew it was type 2, that if I have to examine that patient or put a catheter, you're actually allowed to see, you can actually see the urethra. And that is type 2. So normally it's just a couple of stitches, about 4 stitches from the top to halfway. Then there's type 3 FGM. Type 3 FGM is total removal of the clitoris, the labia minora, the labia majora. They pull the skin together and whatever is left of it, and then they stitch it all the way down, and that is, they leave a little hole that is no more than a matchstick. So it could be like that size. And that's what they expect a girl to have her urine, pass her urine, when she start having her period, to pass her period. And when she get married, she's not allowed to go to hospital to be reopened. It's actually her husband have to push himself to open her. And this is why when we talk about some women who don't even pass surviving of their wedding nights or a couple of days after they get married, is that these women suffer with 3rd-degree tears. 3rd-degree tears. How is any human being or any man or any woman can have a sexual intercourse with a little hole that is no bigger than a matchstick? So this is the reasons, and these are the things that we really need to talk about. But let me go back and finish what I was saying to me, and my story was that once the doctors say that, of course my parents want me to get better. So they said, of course, do whatever you can to make her feel better. Then they operated me, and it was like, wait for your next cycle. 4 weeks later, another ultrasound, the shadow is there, no cycle. So now they know that it was my period, was still accumulating. So what they will do, they take me back to the theater, and then they will drain all of that blood out and try to repair everything, and hoping that I will have my period naturally next month. And then they will say, wait for your next cycle. But to me, it's that once I had my second operation in Mogadishu, is that the war got really big. So the hospital got embombed. So they told us that we got to leave. And I remember that this time my mom, my sisters, my brothers, they all left because the war was so big. But I couldn't go because I'm in hospital. So my father stayed with me. At this point now, when my father was staying with me and I'm in hospital, I actually have to become somebody else because of my father and his position in the army. So I remember my father always saying, if somebody comes to you in the hospital, in the room, and say to you, who are you? Give them a wrong name. If you don't recognize them who they are, give them a wrong name. So here I am, an 11-year-old child, had an FGM at 7 years old, now can't even get her period, but at the same time I'm stranded and I'm actually can't do anything because I'm in a war-torn country. They said, we have another hospital in Djibouti. If you make your way there, then we can see you there because this hospital have to close. And I was like, okay. So my father said, no problem. Now the island that they mentioned, which is Djibouti, is where my mom and my sisters and my brothers who have already gone. Because my mother is from Djibouti. Djibouti is the French colonized part of Somalia, so they never had a war. So when my siblings and my mom left Somalia, they were on their way to Djibouti. So for me, it was as a child, it was like a really relief, thinking that, oh my God, they have a same hospital in Djibouti, and I will be able to see my mom, my sisters, my nieces, and all of that. Anyway, it took us it took about 8 weeks, I think, for my father to find an airplane. And I remember at 12 years old now, running through this field just to get to that little plane on the other side so I can get out of Somalia. But this time I had stitches on my stomach. I just had an operation. And I remember that all I heard was just the shotguns going over my head, and I was just running to get to that plane because that is what I wanted. I know I needed to be at that hospital. And it happened. We made it. I didn't get shot. I didn't die. And that's why I always say I'm the luckiest girl alive, because when we talk about FGM comes a lot of different problems. There is the psychological, there's the medical. So I think for me that I had the medical problems, but it never affected me psychologically because of the war. I always wanted to survive. I didn't want to get shot. I didn't want it to be killed. I didn't want a bomb to land in my house or anything. So for me, I think that's why that I don't have the psychological effect of FGM, but I had all the medical problems. So anyway, we made it to Djibouti. I was taken to the hospital straight away, got there, had an operation. Then they told me to wait for my next cycle, and nothing. 4 weeks, 5 weeks came, nothing. So now this time I already had, I think, about 3 or 4 operations when the doctor said, Hoda, I'm not operating you anymore. I just can't. I'm going to call a professor in Milan and see what he says. The doctor called the professor in Milan. He came to see me. He actually got a ticket, came to see me in Djibouti for 48 hours. First day he came, he introduced himself, he saw me, then he said, tomorrow we're taking you for operation. I said, okay. That morning we went for operation. I had the operation, and then he left. And he said, wait for her next cycle. If her next cycle doesn't come, send her to Italy for me. Because in Italy they have better equipment. And it took 8 months for me from that moment to making it to Milan. Now, it took that long because now we are refugees to this little island. Yes, my mother is from there, but my mom lived in Somalia with us. So we are refugees. So it took about 8 months for my parents to put the money together. So what they did for the 8 months, they still kept me in hospital. And they used to bring a machine that was a see-through through the room, and it had a long tube that was like a catheter. So what they will do that every 4 weeks, they will do an ultrasound. They will be able to see the shadow, and when they see that, they will bring this machine. They'll put this little tube through my vagina, through my cervix, put the machine on, and that was like a hoover. So it used to just suck the blood out. And I remember the first time I actually saw my period was looking through this tube that was just going up and down, and just adding on that bottle. And that is how I had my period for. And again, I always remember when I first saw it, because it's like, wow, that's how I first saw my period for the first time. But at least it saved me for having operations, because if they didn't do that, then I will have to go to theater, they will have to operate me, they have to drain the blood like that. So in a way it was helping me. So we made it to Italy. The visa came, the money came, me and my dad. Now I'm in a country that I know nothing about. I don't know about the language. It was in September. It was sunny. It looked hot, but when I came out, it was so cold. So I couldn't understand why the sun was so hot, but it was so cold. And it was sun was shining, but it's very cold. So took me back to the hospital. So again, for the second time in my life, I was taken from the airport in Milan to the hospital. They kept me there. They didn't operate me straight away. They just kept me there for about, I think, about 6 months, just to do different tests and stuff. Then one morning they take me up. It was, my dad speaks fluent Italian, and so he was writing everything down. I remember I went to the theater. I think it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I came out like 8 in the evening. So it was 12-hour operation. And then they said, wait for your next cycle. Now, I don't know what this cycle is. I don't know what they mean when they say wait for your next cycle. But all I know is that there's something that I have to wait. So I went to the room and waited. 4 weeks later, I remember waking up one morning and it was blood everywhere. And I called for the nurse and she came. And when she came, she just did a little bit of examination, looked around, and she was smiling. And I thought I was dying. So I was really, really mad at the nurse, thinking, how could this woman be smiling when I'm actually dying? Like, there is something. Why is all of this blood on the bed? And I remember her just looking up to me, just like this, and said, Hoda, with her Italian accent, you just had your period. She just told me that I had my period for the first time. And I remember it took me about, I'd say 90 seconds to understand what she was really saying. And she said, yeah, you had your period. And for me, that was the moment. I was like, oh my God, that I'm free. I'm actually free. I don't have to be in hospital for the rest of my life. I don't have to, because that's all I know. That's all I know. And I was 8 years old when I got to hospital. Now, when she's telling me, I was 17 years old. But then, I said to my dad, let's travel the world. We didn't travel far because we become refugees. So we are in Italy now. We hire a car to go through. So we went through from Italy to France and Luxembourg and Belgium and Holland. And when we end up in Holland and we were supposed to drive away, we couldn't because our passport doesn't work anymore. So we are refugees. So I become a refugee. Again, I always knew that if I couldn't go back home, if I couldn't go back home, my sister was here, my nieces were here, my whole family were here in the UK because we came from Somaliland, which is the British colonized. So we always know about London and having families and stuff. So I thought, if I'm ever not allowed to go back to my home, then I'm going to go and see my sister, I'm going to learn English, and then I'm going to go home. That was 20 years ago. So, got here, and at the age of I got here when I was 20. At the age of 23, I was just running upstairs, and now I couldn't stop bleeding. So it was like, at first I couldn't get my period, but now I can't stop bleeding. So of course I went back to gynae because that's the only thing I know. And they were like, amazing doctor, and she said to me, Hoda, you had FGM. You had all these gynecological problems, you had all these operations, so I can't really explain why you're bleeding this much, but what we can do is just to keep an eye on you. And again, you have a lot of adhesions. Adhesions means that once you have an operation, there's always scars that built inside. It's like, okay, so we went there and I just dealt with it like that. Then at the age of 26, I met my amazing husband. Again, FGM is to control women's sexuality. So it's when I get married to prove to my future husband that I'm actually virgin. But for me, it was the opposite. My husband was British. My husband's parents were from Barbados. He don't know nothing about FGM. How am I going to explain all these scars that I have? How am I going to explain that I'm always in and out of hospital? So for me, it was totally the opposite. He's amazing, he understands. So I have to explain to all of that to him, which, like I said, he understands. But I went back to the doctor and I was like, I need to know that why we're not getting pregnant. And that's when she said, again, explain everything, the adhesions, the operations, everything. I had the problems with FGM. And that is when she said, have IVF. And then I waited for a year. We had IVF. We had 5 embryos frozen. We had 1 embryo transfer. I got pregnant. I miscarried for the day before my first scan, which is 6 weeks. So yeah, so they transferred. I miscarried day before my first scan. But because this time I got really sick after I miscarried, so I ended up in ITU. So I had tubes on my nose and my neck. I had central line because I was losing so much weight, so they were feeding me through my neck. And because I had a lot of abscess because of the operations, I had central in NG tube to bring all the pile out. For me it was the most horrific thing I have ever went through. Even though I was sick in Somalia, in the war and everything, for me this was really different. So anyway, I ended up being in ITU for 3 weeks and 45 kilo. I'm 5'11", and I was 45 kilos. So I thought I just need to put some weight on, get well. And when I got well, I went back to the hospital. We make an appointment to have another embryo transferred. And I remember that morning when they took us, I just knew something was wrong because of the office. They took us office instead of a theater, and that's when they told us that none of the embryos survived. And again, I was like, tomorrow is another day. Because trust me, surviving the war to me every day was another day. Just waking up and being alive. So for me, the FGM was like, okay, yes, I'm not healthy right now, and something is stopping me, but it can't stop me. So I always had that spirit of always thinking that it can't stop me. I got to keep on moving. I got to keep on changing. I got to make him getting better. But then when the doctor came, I was like, okay, well. They said none of the embryos survive. And I was like, okay, so none of the embryos survive, but we can have another cycle. And then that's when the embryologist said, I'm going to call the doctor for you, Hoda, 1 minute. The doctor came in, and that's when she was like, I'm really sorry, Hoda. I've been doing this for over 30 years, but right now you cannot have your own child. That if we do any IVF or any transfer, it can kill you. And from first, I didn't understand first. I was like, why? Why is that? But again, remember I keep talking about the adhesions, and I keep going back to the gynecologist with infection, pelvic infection, urine infection. So basically it was, because of the FGM, because all the operations that I had, I am just not a normal patient where they can go and do an egg transfer and do the embryos and then transfer. Any procedure that they do on me, that it can actually kill me, because again, it's just the trigger to give me to have infection. Now, if I do have infection, and I remember when I was in ITU and I had so much abscess, they were thinking to operate me, but they don't want to operate me because for all the operations I had and all the adhesions, when I actually have an ultrasound and they show me where my womb and my ovaries are, they are not in like normal human being. Like my ovaries are like this because of these scars. It's like pulling apart. Sometimes they can't even find the neck of my womb. They have to look around. So doing any of those procedures can introduce infection. And if they do introduce infection and cannot work with antibiotics, they always scared they will operate me, but they always said that if they do operate me, it can damage me more. So that's why no doctor wanted to operate me. And for that reason, when the doctor said, Hoda, you can't have your own child, the options are surrogate mother and all of that, I remember me and my husband just looked at each other and were like, no. And again, he's an amazing human being. He's really supportive, because when the doctor said that, I remember him saying, my wife is not going to die for a child we don't have. And I think any woman in this world needs to hear that empowerment when you are going through things like that. Yes, if it could be your husband, it could be your partner, it could be your sister, it could be your colleague from work. It's just the moment that you need, he was there to say that. And from there, we decided we can adopt. We started the procedure. I lost my mom 2 years ago unexpectedly, so we put everything on hold. But that is what we choose to do now, because I'm alive. FGM did not kill me. FGM doesn't define the person that I am. So in my life, there will be so many different ways to be a mom. But what I know that I can do, and what I know that I dedicated my life, is that I don't want another child like me in 20 years' time sitting where I'm sitting, saying that I had this and we could have done this and we could have changed that, because FGM have no place in our world. FGM is a child abuse. FGM is to control women's sexuality, and we need to stand up, we need to speak up, and we need to change the things that is happening around us. And for me, I didn't need no role model. I didn't need nobody to tell me that what I learned is that what FGM has done to me. But like I said, I stand here today, so it will never define me who I am. But I will not stop fighting until I see a war that is from FGM, as long as I'm breathing.
It's amazing.